I'm Michelle London of RCFE Resource. Welcome to today's broadcast, our monthly Ask the Broker update. Today we'll be discussing what to look for if you're buying an RCFE or an ARF. Most of the things I put in here, it seems directed toward RCFEs. However, the same things are also true of adult residential facilities. And when there's a difference, I'll let you know what the difference is. To those of you who attended last month's broadcast, I know we promised we would put it up on the website, but unfortunately we had some technical difficulties and were unable to do so. This month we'll try and do much better by you. Anyway, I would like to request that if you have questions, put them in the chat box, or at the end, you can raise your hand. For those of you who want to ask me a question privately, we'll be putting up my contact information in the chat box, as well as the next slide, which you can take a screenshot. If ever you want more information about our company or services, or if you want to see our publications and newsletters and our current listings, you can go to www.rcferesource.com. So today, as I say, please hold your questions to the end. We hope you enjoy today's broadcast. Thank you very much for attending. The thing I really want to discuss, it begs the question, when you ask, what should you be looking for if you're buying an RCFE or an ARF? And the question is, should you be even buying one right now, given the high interest rate situation we have going on, the rampant inflation, the rapidly appreciating home prices? But, you know, in the beginning of the year, we projected that interest rates would probably still stay in the 5s and 6s for this year. I know a lot of people think that interest rates may be too high to even successfully buy a care home. But I can tell you, if you look over the past 30 years, for example, interest rates have fluctuated in between 3% and about 18%. So even though interest rates have doubled within the last year to the 6% range, and it would be higher for somebody financing a care home, the interest rate on a mortgage would be higher. But historically, interest rates are really not that high. So the point being, if it's your dream to own an RCFE or adult residential facility, and you're trying to time the market, let me tell you, there's no way you can really do that. Because even when interest rates were in the 18% range, people were still buying real estate. So you can't time the market. And if it's your dream to either begin a new one or add to your portfolio, anytime is really the best time because you just can't time the market. So without further ado, I'd like to share my screen. Just one moment. Okay, I'm screen sharing, but the wrong screen. Okay, let me move this over for you and make it bigger, and let me start from the beginning. Let me start. Okay, so for those of you who were interested in taking a screenshot of my contact information because you may want to talk to me later, here is my contact information. You can always reach us, as I said, at www.rcferesource.com. Okay, now that we've got that, I'm having a tiny bit of technical difficulty advancing this. Just one moment.
Can you double click?
Yeah, I did double click. Let me try it again. There we go. Let me go back. So the question of the day is what to look for when you're buying an RCFE or adult residential facility. And I guess the question is, today, interest rates are high. However, from judging from the number of prospective buyers that are calling us, we believe that demand is pretty great for a nice RCFE or adult residential facility. We constantly get calls looking for it, but since the last couple of years, since actually the beginning of the pandemic, inventory has been very, very low. And the question being, is it a good investment? Well, for an RCFE, I would have to say America is aging, and about 1.5 million people per year turn 85 years old. Given that the average age of care is about 83.5 years old, and the average senior needs about 3 years of care, buying an RCFE is a good investment, despite the current caregiver crisis, the rise in interest rates and inflation. There's a lot of challenges facing care home operators today. But if you can tough it out and get to the other side, then it's really a good investment, because over the long term, if you buy the real estate, over the long term, California real estate has done very well. So my belief is, and leading economists are all predicting, that as a long-term buy and hold investment, buying a care home, the real estate portion is a good investment. So typically what happens is you make an appointment to go see the home. Typically, you would have been provided with profit and loss statements for the last few years. So you will have an idea of the financial condition of the business even before you step foot on the premises. So you come for your appointment. What I have to tell you is, in the process, you have the P&Ls and you'll get to see the home, but that's typically the last time you will see the home before putting in an offer to purchase if you like the home and the business. So typically what happens, there is the appointment where you go and view the home. If you like it, you put in an offer. Hopefully your offer is accepted, and then begins the escrow process. So whatever opinions you might have formed about the financial health of the business and the soundness of the structure, the real estate, you have a chance to do your due diligence. Now, due diligence is when you investigate either the property or the business more fully. And during the escrow period is when the seller has to open their books and has to allow you to do all the investigations that you need to satisfy yourself that it's a good investment. So when you come for the home and you look at it, really, you arrive, you're excited. However, really, really be observational. You want to look at the residents and see that they appear to be well taken care of. Perhaps talk a little bit with the caregivers who are there, just minor conversation, just to get an idea whether these caregivers would be people you would wish to retain. Because what happens so often in the sale of the business, most new buyers are hoping that the caregivers who are currently there will stay on during their ownership of it. And that's typically what happens. But just get a feel for who your caregivers would be if you were to acquire the home. So do the residents appear well taken care of? Do the caregivers seem attentive? Do they seem professional, capable, cheerful? This is what you want to observe. You also want to get a feel for the home itself, because all homes have distinct personalities, just like people. And some homes, even though they may be a good deal financially, they may not be such a good idea when you take into account the overall aura of the home. Because we have known operators who said they purchased a care home that was a good deal financially, but had kind of a bad feel about it. Now, I don't know how much I believe in feng shui, but it certainly sounds like feng shui principles, because some homes have bad auras, and operators have told us when they bought that type of home that they're never really able to successfully turn it into a cheerful and upbeat home. So do pay attention to the overall feeling you get, because if you acquire the home and you lose a resident and you have to fill it with somebody new, the loved one, the family members of the person in care will come to visit the home, and they'll get that same overall vibe that you do. And that may be a very significant weighing force to decide whether or not they want to place their loved one in your home or not. You also want to be attentive to, well, like the home and its smells. It should not have any unpleasant aromas. There should be no smell of urine or feces, anything like that. And if it's present, food smell should be pleasant. I have toured places where it was obvious that they were really economizing on food costs, just because I can't even think of a word for what it was they were cooking. Slumgullion, horrible stuff that I wouldn't feed to a dog. So all these things, you just want to pay a little bit of attention and see the overall vibe that you get from the home. Now, you want to know whether buying an existing RCFE or adult residential facility home is a good investment. And I'm telling you, if you know the right questions to ask and the things to look for, buying an already established turnkey property can be an excellent investment. The big why is the owner selling? Well, you won't always get a definitive answer to that. It often is the case that the owner has been in the business for a number of years, operated successfully, but they're getting burned out. It's time to retire. That seems to be the biggest reason why people are getting out of the business, is for retirement. Some people want to move out of state. But some people, when they start investigating the financials, it might be that the home is really not operating profitably. And unless you can see a way to turn around the home, it may not be a good investment for you. Now, there's some people like to buy distressed properties, ones that may be where the net operating income is in a negative position, where there's a loss. Sometimes there's a real definitive reason. For example, we had this one owner that we know, and she wanted to put her care homes on the market, and they were operating at a significant loss. And when we investigated it further, we found it was really the kindness of the owner that was leading to her downfall. And what I mean by that is she had a number of caregivers who would always plead for overtime, that they needed the extra money. Now, while most places are able to operate with payroll as a percentage of revenues, maybe at 45, 50%, this lady was operating with payroll over 76% of her revenues. And that was just too high. In that case, it's a real obvious solution. It's just not to offer overtime and to have regular standard shifts and backup caregivers for times when it's necessary to fill in. But sometimes if you see and can really pinpoint why a home may be having a problem operating efficiently and cost effectively, sometimes that's a very good investment. What you want to know about the home too. Does it have a full census, or has it been having difficulties in retaining residents? I know overall turnover. I was reading a statistic yesterday that said in the average care home that there's about a 46% turnover each year in residents. And that sounds really high, but it just means that as the new owner, you will have to put on your best marketing efforts in order to attract new residents as inexpensively as possible. During your due diligence portion of the transaction, you'll have a chance to see if expenses are controlled and if rents seem reasonable for the area. What you would want to know too is to do some area studies to see if prices in the area for real estate are stable or appreciating. The one thing you don't want to do is move into a new RCFE or adult residential facility that's located in a declining area, because that means the real estate portion of your investment will probably decrease. And, as part of an investment, usually the real estate portion is the biggest overall cost. But over the long term, the revenues you receive from the business will amount to much more. You have to determine whether the home and the business are both good investments. Now, if you want to buy a home that's distressed and have an absolute action plan for turning it around, that can be a good move. But otherwise, for the most part, most people want to know that the home is in an appreciating area and is a good investment based on its condition, location, amenities, features, and that the business is operating profitably. Now, in order to determine whether the home is a good investment, your agent would be able to perform something called a comparative market analysis, where they would examine recently closed sales of homes that are in your neighborhood. Now, you would be comparing your home to other homes that are nearby you. Now, those other homes are single family residences, and sometimes that's the best approximation for real estate value that we can get, because really a comparison for a care home is another care home. But the problem with that is that so many care homes are sold off market. So that data is never published for sale price of the home or the business, and you never do know that. So using a comp of a model home that's near yours that has sold recently, usually within the last 90 to 180 days, that would be used as a comp. Now, in order to determine the price of the business, it's really an examination of the financial statements and supporting documents will give you an idea whether, number one, the values, the revenues, the expenses, that they're accurately and clearly stated. You will be able to do due diligence, where you can do like a mini audit of the books to determine whether the numbers seem accurate, because there is a danger of understating income and overstating expenses to kind of draw it, but you can't have it both ways. Either you're going to have a profitable home and state the expenses fairly, or you're going to have a home and whoever does due diligence won't be able to trace them to original source documents. So I'll go into detail a little bit later about how you would actually do a mini audit of the books in order to satisfy yourself that the numbers are fairly and accurately representing business operations. You may decide that you want to start with a 6-bed RCFE or a 4-bed adult residential facility. So you also could go for larger, but as a starting venture, maybe the smaller one is best because there are so many on the market that exist right now, not on the market, but in existence. And you may decide you want a larger one. In practice, most RCFEs in California are licensed for 14 or fewer beds. If it is licensed for 7 or more beds, that's considered a commercial use of the property. And there's certain zoning requirements you'd have to comply with. And but that's if you're buying an already existing home, that's already been taken care of. Some cities are more amenable if you're thinking of starting your own from scratch. Some cities are more amenable for a home that's seven bed or above. They're more amenable to granting what's called a conditional use permit or a zoning variance, because most areas are zoned for housing or zoned residential, and you need a commercial zoning. If anybody has any questions on that, I'd be happy to answer that at the end. Be fiscally sound. Don't be like this gentleman depicted in the picture with his head in the clouds. Some buyers do become so enamored with the wonderful features of the home that they fail to really examine business operations to determine profitability. So really, for the most part, you want a home that's in good condition with minimal deferred maintenance, and you want a business that's operating profitably. So consider the area. Is it in a stable or appreciating area? You can get statistical information on a lot of different websites on neighborhood performance factors, such as demographic shifts in age, area median income. You want to ensure that you're investing in an area that has good potential, that it's an appreciating area with real estate doing favorably, where income is either going up in the community. And you really have to consider everything when you're examining a home. Now, the home, does it have any special features and benefits that may command higher rents? Some of those features might be things such as a wake staff, and I'll go into that later. But some homes have caregivers who stay up all night instead of using a caregiver area to sleep and getting up through the night as needed. Now, that's a feature. It costs more to have somebody doing that full night shift and being awake. But, this cost can perhaps be passed on to the residents, because I know families are just enthralled when they hear that there'll be somebody who's awake all night and just ready to take care of the needs of your loved ones at a moment's notice. So that's a factor that is a special home. It's a niche home. It has an awake staff. Other niche homes, we've sold, for example, Japanese-speaking homes or Korean-speaking homes. So it's often a really great idea to get a home that's in a niche market because you'll have less competition. And when you examine the home, when you go for your first visit, does it appear to be in good condition? Because during your due diligence, you'll have an opportunity to really investigate the home. Now, if you're thinking of buying a home and converting it, you really have to budget accurately, because these days, I'd say in the last 3 years since the pandemic, there have been supply chain disruptions. The prices of raw materials and lumber have gone up significantly. And you want to talk to several contractors who have done previous home to RCFE conversions. You want to know too, what are your plans? Are you just going to do a conversion, fill up the home and sell it? Or are you going to hold on to it for a long time and operate it yourself? You also have to know how your neighbors feel about the proposed conversion, because In some instances, in some cities, they can block the conversion in city council if they don't like what you're planning to do with the property. So you have to determine if you're thinking of doing a home to care home conversion, whether the cost to buy the home, make modifications, hire and train caregivers, obtain residence, put in an accurate accounting system software. So there's so many things, hiring, recruiting, and instituting all kinds of systems that you have to determine whether those two costs are comparable. Now, we have noticed when we performed a cost benefit analysis, given today's caregiver shortage and really the low inventory of homes available on the market, it's often the best move to purchase a home that's already in existence with staff that's in place and trained, residents who are in place. So sometimes buying a ready-to-go home, it will certainly get you to your goal faster of owning a care home, and it may financially be a very good move. The costs between the two are not that different. So buying a home that's ready to go may be in your best interest. Now, during the due diligence, I mentioned you'll have an opportunity to investigate the condition of the home, and that's where a general home inspection is a really wise idea. I know when a couple years ago, when prices were just going through the roof and it seemed you could put any premium price on real estate and sell it. Well, those days are over. Fair market value is the key. So during that time that you have an opportunity to investigate the home, take your opportunity. During the time when there were premium prices, some buyers were putting no contingencies, meaning a condition that has to be met before sale can occur. And one of the contingencies is an inspection contingency, which gives you a certain number of days to examine the actual structure of the home. So what you want is to do a general home inspection, whether you're buying or leasing, because with care home leases, most of these are commercial leases, and they obligate the buyer, the new buyer, to pay for maintenance of the home. So it really behooves you to determine that the condition of the home is satisfactory to start with. You also want to have the seller provide you with a termite report that has what's called Section 1 clearance. And that means that the home is free of active infestation by termites or other wood-destroying pests or organisms. And you really want a clean bill of health for your home. You probably, unless you have a lot of extra capital to invest, you probably don't want to buy a home that has significant deferred maintenance and there's a lot of things need fixed, and they're very that they may be things that are not cosmetic, but are things that affect health and safety of the residents. And you want to make sure that you do a home inspection and determine all the areas of concern. Because what a general home inspection does is it examines the major systems of the home. It'll look at HVAC, plumbing, electrical, and they'll examine the attic and other spaces that are open for examination. And this is another time in the transaction where you will have an opportunity to negotiate, because at the conclusion of the inspection, the inspector will issue a report and note the areas of concern, either health and safety issues or just things that would be good to have repaired, but are not necessarily impacting health and safety. So at that time, the buyer has an opportunity to prepare a request for repairs. And while the owners won't typically do anything cosmetic, if there's some area of the home that is deficient in some way, not operating correctly or properly, and really needs fixed, you can request that these items be repaired by the seller prior to close of escrow. Now, cosmetic things they won't do, but if it's a health and safety issue, I mean, maybe the roof is leaking, something like that, well, then that will need addressed. Maybe there's signs of water damage on the walls that may be indicative of a more complex leak, or a pipe that's burst that may not be obviously apparent just from looking at it. So a general home inspection and a termite inspection will give you a pretty good idea the condition of the home. That being said, there are some areas that inspectors really can't reach. We heard of a case recently where they couldn't go under the crawl space into the home because there were all types of impediments and things blocking the way into the crawl space. So the inspector was not able to examine it. And based on what they had performed, they said that the home appeared to be in good condition, but that was not true at all. There was a definite slab problem where it was sinking. And upon further investigation, once the new owner took occupancy, these things became clear that there seemed to be a foundational issue. So for the most part, inspections catch most of the major problems of a home. And as a result of your inspection, you may need to do a further inspection, as in that case with the foundation sinking. If something like that was noticed, maybe you noticed that the floor isn't exactly level, or there appear to be tiny hairline fractures in the walls or in the driveways and walkways, that could be indicative of foundational issues. And in that case, you'd probably need a soils expert to determine whether or not your home is in the home you're planning to acquire is in good condition. Now, if you're planning significant modifications, it's a good idea to know how your neighbors feel about the care home. And this will be an RCFE or an adult residential facility. We knew a gentleman who bought an RCFE, and it had 4 bedrooms, but there was room in back to add a few additional bedrooms, and he had the money, and that was his plan from the beginning. But he found that he was living in a city that had what's called a neighbor impact form, which means if you're planning on making major modifications to the structure, as in adding new rooms, I'm not talking about inside reconfiguring rooms, but really just adding on to the structure, your neighbors may have to sign off their approval, because they're the ones who will be troubled by construction noises, any kind of dust or dirt or soot, and just maybe they don't want to live next door to a neighbor who has an RCFE or adult residential facility and add on to the home. So this one gentleman who wanted to increase his square footage and add a few rooms, when it came time to getting his neighbors to sign off, they wouldn't sign off. They didn't like the RCFE being in the community because, as one of them told me, it's only because it's on a corner lot and my children see the gurneys coming out of the home on the side of the home. So they didn't even like the presence of a care home in their community, and they blocked him from adding additional rooms. So his initial plan to get more revenues by having all private bedrooms, he was never able to act on that. So, you should really, if you're planning significant modifications, before this goes too far in the transaction, introduce yourself to your neighbors, your newest neighbors, and your agent can obtain the phone numbers where they can be reached and everything. And it's a good idea to either go and knock on their door or contact them by phone and just indicate, confidentially, of course, because most of these sales are confidential, but indicate to them maybe that you would be thinking of adding on if you were to acquire the home, and how did they feel about it? Would they have any difficulty if it is one of the neighborhoods that require a neighbor impact form, how they feel about the home being in their community. You also want to know, after you've done your request for repairs, and hopefully the seller has acquiesced to a lot of your demands, if you still have demands, like the care home needs spiffed up a little bit, maybe some new furniture, maybe some new floors, you want to know that these things, any kind of asset acquisitions or repairs or renovations, that you'll be able to finance these from cash flow unless you have some other source of capital. The business has to be operating successfully enough that it can sustain itself. Because as I tell people all the time, you're running a business first, which secondarily gives you the opportunity to take care of those who are vulnerable among us. So you want to know if, for example, if you see that the home, like the kitchens and the bathrooms, are in desperate need of repair, given the cash flow scenario that you're presented when you look at the P&Ls, does that seem like your home will be making enough capital and cash flow to finance these things? You also want to look at the rooms. Now, I know the larger nursing homes and larger assisted living facilities really didn't fare that well during COVID in terms of infection control. It was really the larger facilities that were hit the hardest for the most part. Now, I know in the smaller homes, they have weathered the COVID infection storm pretty well, much better than the larger facilities have. And today I'm saying what we've noticed in the requests we receive from prospective buyers, it seems that most everybody is looking for 6 private bedrooms because that seems to be what is demanded on the market. Now, we have had a number of people say that one shared room would be adequate, but ideally you'd like a home with all private bedrooms and then an area for caregivers to rest. Or if you plan to have a wake staff, you don't need that. But today, the rooms that receive the most fanfare are those rooms that have a private room with a bathroom inside the room. Those command the highest rates. When you examine the rent rolls of the home, of the business rather, do you see that the rates they're charging are comparable to area norms? And how you can see what the area norms are, you can go on a number of websites and unlock the prices of homes in that area. The websites are things like seniorly.com or aplaceformom.com or caring.com. And you may have to sign up like you're going to place a loved one, but they will unlock the prices of comparable facilities. So your agent will be able, hopefully they're conversant. They can give you a list of all the homes that are in your nearby area so that you know who your competition is. And I don't know, perhaps it's unorthodox, but I think if I were going to be purchasing a care home, I would look at my competition in the neighborhood and see what they're doing, make appointments to go visit so that you can see what you're up against and whether your home can in some way shine so that you're the one who attracts new visitors and ultimately new residents. So you can perform an area survey of the comparable rates by looking at the websites I mentioned. In some homes, you'll notice when you look at the rent rolls that there's a couple people at a much lower rate that seem to have a sweetheart deal. And that could be that during times of very low census, the owner, just in order to be able to pay payroll, that they acquired another resident and gave them a very favorable price, which was below area norms, but it filled the room, or maybe they were right there from the beginning. So you have to determine when you look at the rent rolls, are these prices you can live with, or do you think you'll be raising rents in the future? And that comes with it the danger of losing residents. It's possible. In a lot of areas, the rents are already stretched pretty much as far as they'll go. So given the area competition, you may not be able to raise rents substantially. And you want to know too that the business is operating like a business. And when I say operating like a business, I also happen to be a CPA, and I think it's very important. It shouldn't be a chore, but to prepare monthly profit and loss statements on a timely basis, because in this way you can prepare them, but you have to review and monitor the various categories, and that will tell you very early on any type of trends or cost overruns. You'll be able to notice it from month to month, the changes, and take corrective action where necessary. And that will be the topic of a future webinar. I believe it's in October or November, but we'll be discussing ways to cut back expenses if you have a care home, to cut back your monthly expenses. We'll provide some easy to do fixes, and we hope you'll attend that broadcast as well. So have your financial professional examine the P&Ls for the past few years. Get an idea. You can unofficially audit. And here I have it actually the reversed. It says unofficially audit financial information to check for over-reporting of income and under-reporting of expenses. And that's absolutely the reverse. I stand corrected. You want to check that they're not under-reporting income. And we've had homes that maybe we had this one home. It was licensed for 15 residents. They had 13 residents, but they were reporting income for only 10 because he wanted to keep his net operating income low for tax purposes. Now, while his P&Ls might not have provided a very accurate way of looking at income and expenses, typically what you can do in order to do a mini audit, you'll want to look at the biggest items on the profit and loss statement. Obviously, the biggest one is resident rents. You want to be able to trace this information to original source documents. And what I mean by that is some external document that wasn't produced by this care home to verify the accuracy of income coming in. So typically, you could look at the page on the admissions agreement and see what rate they have agreed to and signed off on. You can trace that to a monthly rent roll. The total of the monthly rent roll should be able to be traced to your monthly P&L, and then ultimately to a bank statement deposit. So in this way, you're tracking the money coming in into the bank statements ultimately, so that you see that the income that's being reported is actually the income that's coming in. Now, it is possible that they're keeping two sets of books, but we haven't found many operators doing just that. Usually it's on the up and up, and they want to report income as fully as possible because it makes their business look better. When you want to look at expenses, you'll also do the same thing for expenses. For payroll, you'll be able to check it against monthly payroll runs and the monthly P&L, and you'll be able to trace that to a deduction from the bank statement. So if anybody wants any further information about how you would actually do a mini audit, I'm happy to provide that in a conversation with you personally. So you would also check payroll, food, liability insurance against as many original source documents as possible so that you get a fair and complete idea of income and expenses. Now, sometimes it comes the situation that an owner owns several facilities. Maybe they own 2, 3, 4. And what they've done, because they were sure they'd never sell, or if they did sell, they were sure that they would sell them as a group, that they just consolidated the P&Ls and have one combined P&L for both facilities or all the facilities that exist. What happens is often life intervenes, and due to a change in circumstance of health or family situation, they may need to just sell one in order to meet whatever their requirements are at the moment. Well, in that case, you'll have to have them separate out each facility separately. And that can be a challenge for a lot of providers, because there has to be a reasonable way to allocate the major expenses. Often it's very easy to determine income because it's income per the home. Payroll, if the homes are located geographically very close to one another, they may share caregivers, and payroll might not be as accurate as you would hope. But there's reasonable ways to allocate that so that you can get the truest picture of business operations. And your financial professional can help you do this. If it's a combined report, they have to separate it out. But I would have it examined by your financial professional. Sometimes what we've noticed, what we typically request of owners is business bank statements and business credit card statements for the last 2 years, the current year and the year that's passed. Often, well, I don't know how often, but we've seen it happen many, many times that the owner uses one bank account for business and personal uses and uses one credit card for business and personal uses. And in that case, without looking at most every transaction, you may think that the expenses are understated, and that would be very difficult to separate out. There would be a way to value it, but in order to get the truest picture of a business operation, you want to make sure that they have separate bank accounts and separate credit card accounts just pertaining to the business. You'll do a payroll cost analysis, as I was mentioning. You'll determine that payroll costs seem reasonable given what the rents are. And as I was mentioning, that one operator, her payroll was considerably higher than probably most other operators. And it was easy to pinpoint why her business was losing money. It was simply that one thing. Otherwise, the businesses were operating very effectively. So you will also get a schedule of resident rents, and you'll be able to see the admission agreements. Sometimes you won't be able to see the full admission agreement due to privacy and HIPAA concerns, but you will be able probably to get a page where the rent is stated. And you want to know that these residents are paying on a timely basis and that the rents are in accordance with the admission agreement. There could be just one set rate for the person. There could be add-ons, but you want to make sure that it's delineated and that it agrees to the rent rules and to the numbers that are being put on the P&Ls. Payroll too, the question arises, who works. Now, if you're acquiring a care home and it's the family, one single family who are operating it, where they have brothers and sisters and cousins and parents, everybody's in there. Well, if it's the owner and their family, your payroll costs will likely go up when you acquire the home because you won't be able to pay them like family members. And you also want to examine if there's excessive overtime or use of temporary caregivers, because when you acquire caregivers through an agency, it is at a premium rate. We suggest, in order to obtain caregivers most cost effectively, that you contact local CNA programs or licensed practical nurse programs and see. I mean, most of them have placement for their graduates of the school, and they're more than happy to help hook you up with some of their newest graduates. It'll be up to you, of course, to do the training, but that's a cost-effective way to obtain additional caregivers. And so in terms of resident rents, you want to make sure that there is no accounts receivable balance, that they're being paid in time, and that you'll have to ask the owner this, or have your agent actually, but you want to know that during times of full census, that there have been regular increases that correspond to cost of living adjustments. And you want to know too, as far as rents that are in the home that you're considering purchasing, you want to know that it's comparable to similar homes in the area. Awake staff, this is what I was mentioning. You want to know that if they do have awake staff that does not sleep at night, that is available all night long and is awake, that's something that you really should be able to pass the cost on to the residents, because it's such a desirable feature of a particular facility. A lot of families just absolutely love when they know mom and dad can be taken care of at a moment's notice at 3 a.m. You want to know too that when you do your mini audit, that the resident rents are accurately presented on the monthly bank statements as deposits, and that for things such as payroll and liability insurance, that they either come out of a bank statement or a credit card. You'll be able to see a deduction. So your financial professional should be able to help you do all the mini auditing you need to in order to satisfy yourself as to the validity and accuracy of the numbers you've been presented. And really, the total of all months should be traceable to the tax return. Excuse me. You want to check online sources. Now, I know with care homes, you can go to the California Department of Social Services website, and that's at www.cdss.ca.gov. And you can look at the reports of licensing surprise visits to the home and see if there were any deficiencies or citations that were issued. Now, the thing is, there's Class A and Class B citations. One's for patient care violations, and the other is more paperwork violations. Obviously, the ones that are relating to resident care, those are a much more serious matter, but you do want to look and see what the surprise visits to the home, what the reports are. Of course, any outstanding citations must be corrected by close of escrow. You want to make sure that your care home has a good reputation with Department of Social Services. And you also want to read online reviews of the home. So by that, you can often look up a home, and number one, you can look at their website, which I heartily suggest doing. Their website may be pretty accurate and complete and used for marketing purposes, or it may be bare bones basic. But you should be able to look at the website, and hopefully it has some testimonials from satisfied clients. But then again, if those are generated on their website, you don't know necessarily how impartial they were. So I would go to online sources. I would Google the name of the home, like Heavenly Skies reviews, and that'll take you to websites where there's reviews of the home. You want to make sure that those are favorable and that the care home is well thought of in the community. That adds on to the goodwill that you will be purchasing when you purchase a care home. So you do want to be aware of any kind of potential problems. We had one care home that we sold, and the first two people that looked at the home came back and said, this home has such terrible reviews. And we found out that in actuality, there were several good reviews, but during COVID and during the early stages of COVID, when most care home operators would not allow family members to come in and spend time with their loved one, well, someone didn't like that, and they initiated a letter writing campaign with themselves and their entire family. So there were something like 24 bad reviews on the home, all stemming from one event, and then a few good reviews that had nothing to do with this event. So you have to dig deeper. When I say be observant, that's being observant and doing due diligence at all stages of the transaction, while you still have time to back out of the transaction without penalty. And that's a good thing. That's what the due diligence period is for, to do all your examinations of the home where you will still be able to get your deposit back and where you won't owe anything at the conclusion if the transaction falls out, or you decide based on your investigations that the home is not for you, that you'll get your money back, minus any minor escrow fees that have actually been incurred. If there's a website for the RCFE, do look at it. And, if you examine it and see that it's bare bones basic, I guess you can look at it with the view that you can do much differently. If it's a bare bones basic website, it means they probably weren't using it intensively for marketing purposes, because a really good website should have a slew of testimonials. And if anybody wants suggestions on how to get happy testimonials from your residents, we've got ideas, because in our business, we ask for testimonials, and we found some of the easiest ways to get them written. But in terms of the website, your website should have testimonials. It should have video of the home. It should have pictures of the home with the residents engaged in happy activities, social hours, holidays. It should be an inviting website that gives a full enough presentation of the home that you actually want to go visit it. And that would be something that you could use when you're marketing to the public. But you could also use this. Residents can be expensive to obtain. I'm sure you all know that, especially if you're resorting to a referral agency, and their fees can be anywhere between, 50 to 125% of the first month's rent, with some being really, really high. But we suggest that you try and obtain residents as inexpensively as you can. So have a thoroughly crafted, well-designed website that reaches out to the important places that you may be able to get residents for free. And that would be hospice, skilled nursing facilities. Talk to the discharge coordinator at a lot of local hospitals. and skilled nursing and some hospice if they have a resident that no longer needs that level of care. And they have seen your website, seen your home, get an idea that it's a great place. Well, that would be an inexpensive way to obtain residence. You want to know too, in terms of income and expenses, we've seen it done several different ways, but any resident refunds that you've had to make should be accounted for as a deduction from gross rents. So if it's not, that would lead to the possibility of over-reporting the income. And you, as I was mentioning before, you want to make sure that expenses are properly reflected on either the bank statements or on credit cards. You want to know the insurance history of claims for the home. So during your due diligence, the seller of the home or business can provide loss run reports for both the liability insurance and the workers' comp. You want to see that the home doesn't have a significant history of claims, because that could, depending on what the nature of the claims were, this could be something that will carry over to your tenancy in that building. So the website should promote a really positive view of the home and give you a desire to visit it. You want to get an idea, if it's possible, to see how much website traffic that website is receiving. Is it going out? Is it really going out to the public so that they can find out about your home? Area competition, you have to know who your competitors are and what they're charging, and if you can afford to compete. Now, goodwill, as far as the business price of the facility, part of the price of the business will be constituted of goodwill. What is goodwill? It includes a number of things. Goodwill includes the right to operate under the seller's license until you receive your own, which is a really wonderful benefit, because let's say you acquired the home by lease or purchase. Well, either you're going to have a mortgage payment or a lease payment. And if you couldn't start realizing revenues at close of escrow, that would be a difficulty. You wouldn't have income to match your expenses. Now, with adult residential facilities, there is the added stage of needing to get vendorized by regional center prior to operation. But goodwill also reflects the reputation of the home in the community. There's some homes that have opened up during the early days of COVID when they were first giving vaccinations. Some homes had vaccine clinics where they invited the neighbors in the community to come in and get vaccinated prior to when they would have otherwise been able to do so. So a lot of homes have done a lot of community outreach. So they get a lot of word of mouth referrals and referrals from friends and family of current residents. So goodwill also includes the reputation, the right to operate under the seller's license, and the expectation of the income that you will be receiving based upon an examination of historic profit and loss statements. So I guess the general assumption is if you acquire a home and it's operating at a certain rate of income and expenses, that your home under your operation, if you were to do things carry on just as before, that you would be able to realize the same income and expenses. So that's just something that you want to get a really good idea if you will be able to operate the same way. So if you do, then goodwill is the right to operate under the seller's license and the expectation of income. It's called the principle of anticipation, and that means that you can anticipate the same streams of income coming to you as the prior owner. As far as the neighborhood, there's some areas that just seem oversaturated with homes. And while there's some providers do really well and can command high rents, even in such neighborhoods, sometimes the area is really too saturated so that there's room for maybe a number of care homes to operate, but then the remainder of the homes have trouble getting residents. It's not so much a thing with an adult residential facility since residents are supplied by regional center, but with an RCFE, if the area is oversaturated, it may be difficult for you to keep your census up. You also want to know what homes are coming on the market in your area pending. And that's something that can be ascertained by returning to the California Department of Social Services website. They give you an idea of any pending homes that are coming on the horizon, but you also have to do your research and see who's advertising in the area. It may be that there's some larger, really glitzy home that is offering low introductory rates that you can't compete with, and they have so many more amenities than what your home has. So really, make sure when you hire a real estate professional to help you in your acquisition of a new home, make sure that they're thoroughly cognizant and that they thoroughly understand the care home market so that they can best advise you as to what's happening in the market in the area and what's anticipated to be coming on the market in future. I've had second thoughts about whether your agent should negotiate a clawback clause into the contract. And what that is, let's say you purchase a care home and you purchase a care home and you lose residents after you acquire the home. Absent a raise, an increase in rents, or given that the residents didn't need a change in level of care. So let's just say you lost new residents because they didn't like you. Well, sometimes an agent can negotiate what's called a clawback clause into the contract, whereas you would be remunerated if you as the new owner lose residents based on just no reason, just that they didn't like the new ownership, and you'd be entitled to a return of a portion of the price you paid for the business. But these are hard to evaluate, hard to calculate, and sometimes more trouble than they're worth because it can come into a he said, she said. So they're often very difficult, but they can be a valuable tool. If you like this webinar, this Ask the Broker webinar, and would like to subscribe to our publications, we put out weekly emails and a monthly newsletter. It's a market report for California real estate in terms of care homes. You can subscribe to our publications. You can take a screenshot of this if you wish. You can go to www.rcferesource.com. You can always come to our website for information or ways to reach us. I'm going to open it up for questions in one moment. Please feel free to type them into the chat box or raise your hand and we will unmute you for the question. Also, if you want to ask your question privately, take a screenshot of the next slide. It has my contact information, which is also in the chat box. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and open it up for questions. Okay, so our first question, let me look at the chat box and see what questions. Okay, Is there any resource website where we can see comparable rents for RCFE residents? Yes, you can go to sites such as A Place for Mom. You can go to caring.com. You can go to Seniorly. That's SENIORLY.com. And those will give area rents of your competitors in the neighborhood. The second question comes from us from Siva. Would you support us to do market feasibility to determine RCFE market saturation? And the answer to that question is absolutely. Yes, Siva, we can do that. We'd be able to provide you with information of all the care homes in the area, and we could help you examine comparable rents in other facilities in the area by reviewing the websites and the sites that have information on rents, which is Seniorly, caring.com, A Place for Mom. From Philip, what do you consider to be a good operating profit range as a percentage of revenue? Well, you know, the pandemic has really thrown that answer into disarray. It used to be maybe about 20% of gross operating revenues would be a nice net income, but with increases in payroll, just sheerly because of the increase in the minimum wage, and then sometimes increases in payroll because you've got to give overtime because you just can't get staff, things such as that. So it's harder to say. I'd say maybe between 15 and 20%, but some homes that are operating really efficiently can do much better. From Gina, how long do you think will a house get licensed as an RCFE? Well, typically, if you have an RCFE an adult residential facility is a little different because the home needs license and it also has to get vendorized, meaning authorized for payment by regional center. But for an RCFE, I would say from what we're hearing, it's taking about 5-6 months to get licensed, although we have heard reports of 3 or 4 months. Now, if you're converting a home from scratch, that may take about close to a year, and maybe even more if you're starting from scratch with an adult residential facility. But I'd say on average, maybe about 5 or 6 months. From Inga, I heard that you can't sell or buy the license, and if we use the seller's license while the buyer's waiting for their own license, who will be responsible if something happens, since regional center doesn't allow to sell vendor? Okay, so I'm gathering this is from an adult residential facility operator, and that's exactly true. Regional center does not allow you to sell the vendorization. That's something that you have to go through the process directly with regional center. And we recommend using a very good application consultant and somebody who has ties, a professional who has ties as your application consultant, who has ties to your local regional center, because they may have learned the ropes and found ways to smooth you through that transition. So if something happens while you're using the seller's license, ultimately the seller is still on the hook until the license is transferred, but typically actions of a new operator are attributable to the operator, but it is ultimately the seller that still has responsibility. From Philip, for California RCFEs, do you have an opinion on the Medi-Cal waiver program? Does it add value, diminish value, etc.? Well, there are either 14 or 15 counties in California that do have the assisted living waiver. And for many operators, it has proven to be a real boon because it can increase net profits. New residents come to you based on a certain level of care and a certain negotiated rate of pay. Depending on the level of care required, it may be that you will earn more with an assisted living waiver, and they also place residents, so you won't have to be going out and scouting for residents. If you have an assisted living waiver, they will be provided for you, meaning the residents. But yeah, I think it can be a real boon and help increase net income if the negotiated rate of reimbursement is higher than what you've previously been receiving on the home. Let me see. I think for the moment, that's all we have in terms of questions in the chat box. As far as anybody raising their hand, I don't see anybody raising their hand. I want to thank you very much for attending today's broadcast of the Broker Monthly Ask the Broker Monthly Update. We hope you enjoyed today's broadcast and found it useful. You know, when we have worked with buyers and sellers, we have found that most buyers who require care home financing elect to obtain SBA financing because it's often, although it may carry a slightly higher interest rate, it offers preferential terms on the amount of down payment you have to put on the home and the business. So since SBA financing is so popular, I'd say 95% of our buyers who need financing elect SBA financing. We will be having next month on Tuesday, March 21st, we will be having another Ask the Broker monthly update, and it will be titled How SBA Financing Can Help You Acquire Your Next Care Home. We hope to see you there Tuesday, March 21st. If you would like to sign up, you can always go to our website, which again is www.rcferesource.com. I thank you very much for attending today's broadcast, and until next month, we will see you then. Be well, take care, and keep the faith.